I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Mrs. Donna. She is going to come up here and bless us, and I'm excited to hear what she has to say. Amen? Give her a hand.
Thank you. I'm kind of excited to hear what I've got to say, too, because we're going to see what the Holy Spirit does. I just want you to close your eyes for a second and think of all the things in your life that you either have been afraid of, you currently are afraid of, the things that you think you're supposed to be afraid of, just for a moment. Some of you would be, what if Terry asked you to come speak? And that would terrify you. And some of you, it can be things like rejection or fear, abandonment, snakes. There are a lot of fears that we carry around in our spiritual memories, our physical memories, our body memories. There are things that we have. And so just right now, just ask yourself before I start speaking, what if you were not afraid? What if I'm not afraid? What if we lay down fear and embrace faith? Not this colloquial faith, but just embrace faith. And so right now, if we can just make a decision right now, I choose to not be afraid. I choose faith. And when I feel afraid, which is different than being afraid, there are feelings of fear, but there's true afraidness within us that holds us back. And if we can choose right now, that I'm at least going to try to choose faith. I'm not asking you to commit to never being afraid again, but just choose that in this moment. Lord, we're not afraid. We're not afraid to trust you. We're not afraid to fail for you, because in love there is no fear. That's right. And you are perfect love. So right now, even if you're listening online, take a moment. Those things that pop to mind that you never say out loud, those are the things that are fear. Those are the things that are holding us back. And so right now, we're going to choose no fear. Thank you, Lord. When Terry asked me to speak, I said no, honestly. And I just got back last night from being in Georgia, and because he said, well, we're going to, I'm like, I am too. And we were coming back possibly on Sunday. And then, it ended up working out that one of the girls we're going with, she needed to be back by Sunday too, because she and her husband pastor church out in Monette. And sorry for the tears, but I'm not afraid to cry in front of you anymore. So I was like, okay. And then normally there's a little bit of time in between where I get to think about what I'm going to say, and the Lord starts popping those things in my mind. And he starts giving it to me, and I'll be making notes back, wherever I am all the time. And he didn't. And so then I was like, okay, God, I'll just talk. As my husband can tell you, I can talk. Most of you can attest to that as well. But talking with value and meaning is different than just talking. I can talk about the phone book. You want to talk about the phone book? I can tell you, I can come up with a message about the phone book in 2 minutes. And it will not have a lot of value to it, but I can tell you how to find, how to get listed first in the phone book. But then I started, okay, Lord, I'm just going to trust that you're going to give me the message. And last night at 9 o'clock, driving back from Georgia is whenever he gave me the message in 4 minutes. And it was, what if we're not afraid? And that was the only note that I took on Friday night that from a speaker I went to see. So I'll start back at the beginning and work my way to this point. So, and we'll see if it tracks. For those of you listening online, and I'm just going to address this. If a woman speaking to you makes you feel afraid or threatened, then that is the fear within you. And so I'm believing that God will cast that fear off of you. There are men that every time I've spoken, they start putting these pictures of women with duct tape over their mouths and saying that I will not let a woman have authority over me or be my pastor. I'm like, I'm not trying to be your pastor, I'm just trying to speak to you. There are men that are fighting out because I grew up in a church like that. And women speaking was, what are you doing? And there's still a lot of people in my past and in my history and in my peripheral that still believe that way. But what if God is trying to free you from something, and there's a woman or a wife or a daughter that's speaking to you, and you're choosing not to hear it because a woman can't have authority over you? I'm not trying to have authority over you. I'm just trying to gift you some peace. Yes. And so those three men that keep saying those things is that I'm not afraid to speak. And God is not afraid, and so maybe you can lay down some of your fear. Amen. Come on. Just Holy Spirit said to say it, so I'm going to say it, and we'll just get past that. So growing up, I am the second of 6 children, and we grew up not with very little money and with a bigger mentality of no money. Because there are a lot of people that grow up with very little money, and the kids come out and say, we never knew that we were poor. We never knew that we were struggling. I knew. I was very confident in that, and part of that were decisions that were made, and I won't speak badly about my parents or anything like that because they were doing the best that they could with what they had and with what they understood, but more so with their brokenness, because we're all broken people. Right. We're all people that we're meeting people in the midst of their interactions of who they are. So you're not just meeting me, you're meeting my history and what we've overcome. And I'm sorry if crying makes you uncomfortable. I don't know why I'm crying, but probably because I got about 8 hours of sleep this whole weekend. But more so is that there are things that you just have to be real about. And so growing up, there were things that we were taught. You're not from a baby like Kai. Oh, this little Kai, I just adore him. And he comes to our mom's group and he goes over. He is not afraid of anything, is he? The boy is not. I mean, there might be things where he like falls down or something and people might make him nervous. But he will walk, and if you don't help him down those stairs, he might just walk straight off because he's not afraid that those stairs are gonna, that he's gonna fall so much. And he has this divine confidence in him that there is someone that is going to catch him if he tries to step off these stairs. And I watched him at our mom's group, and he was walking along, and moms were, we're just different things, and he's just playing, doing whatever, and he goes to take a step off, and someone grabbed him and set him down. And then he was doing something else, and someone grabbed him. It's not that she was ignoring. We're all just doing stuff, and we're all just having a good time. That's what community looks like. And the fact that we are all willing to step in and catch and move and hold, that builds a confidence in the other person to know that I can trust you with me, and I can trust you with my people. And there's a huge thing that goes with this, is that I grew up without that trust. When I was about 4 or 5, time's fluid, and I'm 50 now, so, it's going to get even more so. So somewhere back before I was taller than this, my uncle and aunt and uncle, all the cousins, there were, I think, 8 of them at the time. There were 6 of us and all the adults, and we're at the lake, and my uncle just said, all right, guys, you're either going to drown or swim, and he starts throwing us all in the lake. And which might be a way that some people learn how to swim, and I was drowning. And fear engulfed me like the water. And my dad's fear engulfed him, and he grabbed me, and he pulled me out. He couldn't swim, so he knew if I got too far out, he couldn't save me. And so he grabbed me out, and from that point on, I didn't trust my uncle, because I knew that he was willing to let me die to see if I would live. Which the church has been a bit like that for a time as well. And my fear became so great is that I had to have a life jacket to do anything. And it was like playing in shallow water life jacket. And I'm talking at 10 years old by then, where I could definitely touch if it wasn't over my ankle, but that fear would engulf me. And when I had my oldest daughter, the Lord said, you can't be afraid of water and teach a child to swim. That's true. And, and my parents, they couldn't do anything for us, so then they would just give us life jackets because they equipped us the best with what they had because they couldn't swim. And I didn't want to be the person that had to stand on the side and watch my children try and live. I had to be able to equip them. So I would stick my face in the water and be like, you are not going to die. Now, I was 24 at the time, so it was a little silly. It looked, anyway, but I would put my face in the water just for a second, and that fear would come up, and I'd be like, you're not going to die, and I'd pull my face back out. And so then the Lord's like, put your face in the shower, because I was always the person that showered, where my face never got underneath, which is always great, and you're like, tip in, and water would run down, and I'd get this fear panic thing. Lord's like, you're not going to die. So I had to start doing this thing, and at 50 years old, I still will put my face straight into the water, and I'll say, you're not going to die. You're not going to die. You're not going to die. Because fear is bigger than reality. And what are the things, what are the things that are like the water that is making us feel afraid? And so as the Lord started talking to me about this last night, I'm typing, we used to type like this, now I'm typing with my thumbs and everything. And I'm pretty fast. It's pretty amazing. Some teenagers are taking lessons from me. But so as I was going through this, the Lord started asking me, okay, what if you weren't afraid? What would you do? Who would I be? What would I say? What would I attempt? And what dreams would I pursue? And then what words are the antithesis of fear? What are those things? What is feeding into that? And why do we choose fear over faith? So as a mom with 4 kids, I began to see my parents a little differently. And there were 6 of us, and the youngest 2 were twins, and then they had a 2-year-old right above that. So they were basically cattle herders, but then they had to work. And so that was our job. And my older sister and I, we had 4 kids to raise, not raise because my parents were doing their job. But what we were equipped with was keeping them alive. And sometimes it didn't look like we were because we were like, and we grew up in Sparta once I hit 14. I'm from California, Oklahoma, Washington, Oregon, California, Oklahoma, Missouri. So that was all before I turned 14. I'd been all those places, and so when we landed in Sparta, first and foremost, we were from Fresno whenever I was in 2nd grade, and my experience had been that people are scary, and so much so that there was these gangs that roamed in the area where we lived, and I went to school, and we walked to school, of course, because it's just gangs. And it was only like 6 blocks. And so my dad had taken a part of the fence that would swing, but you couldn't tell. And if someone were ever chasing us, we had a drill that he did, that if they were chasing us, we could run through this yard, swing that fence, and then hide behind the pomegranate bush. And they wouldn't be able to see us. And so we would practice that. So pomegranate bushes are awesome. Love them. But there was this fear, like, what I heard was that somebody is going to chase you. Not if somebody, the operative word, but somebody's going to chase you. This is where you hide. So every person that was ever on the sidewalk was chasing me. And so, I became this thing is that you get home. I became a really fast runner. And that's probably why I ended up in track, because of those people chasing me that the little old lady walking with her dog. She's after me. But everybody became a threat. And so people around me were a threat. Anybody that drove a car kind of slowly, and I'm not saying that we weren't threats, but everybody became a threat to me. And so all men were threats, all teenage boys were threats, all people in cars were threats. I'm second grade. I'm, running for my life, basically. And so you built that in there, and you don't know that that's there. And then we moved from California out to Oklahoma, and, there's 6 of us. We look like a circus going everywhere. But then we were the poor people, but I didn't know we were poor yet because you're still young. And I did a 4-H. I was in 4-H because that's, they take all the kids. And my mom's like, hey, take some, feed them, do what you want. And so they did a news article on me in 7th grade. And they asked all these questions because I'd won, I'd made a tote bag, and I don't know. I was obviously very advanced in my seamstress skills and canning pickles and doing stuff. But I just wanted to be involved. And the story became is that because, and I still have it, it goes through, and the way that it told us, because I'm so ignored and neglected, that 4-H has just really saved me. And, and that if it weren't for that, I wouldn't really get the experiences and everything. And I was just talking about how excited I was, and I love doing this, and because there's so many kids, and it's just so fun. And for me, I was excited, and then I was like, oh, it's because I'm poor that this is good for me, and that kind of thing. So then I was like, okay, so now, boom, all people are scary, water will kill me, and now we're so poor that if it weren't for this club, then I would never get to do anything. So then I became a habitual club joiner, although, I'm sorry, Mrs. Swick, but FHA was never going to be my thing because I was never going to be a homemaker when I got to high school. And she was like, I'm like, no. And I was not FFA because I was never going to be a farmer. So I was from California. I was too cool for that. But the thing that happened is that I joined everything because that's the place where I needed to be successful. And if I'm in the club, I have to be the president or at least something. So then I had to run for office because that made me important. And so you start going through all these things. And then what looks like someone that's just really ambitious is just someone that just wants to belong. Because I didn't want to look like I didn't fit. And so you look at that. And then you go to church. And my 3rd grade, no, probably 5th grade teacher was a pastor's wife. Sweet little lady, Mrs. Ball, the only teacher's name I remember before high school. I moved a lot. That was 14 schools before 8th grade. So I have no idea, but Mrs. Ball was the pastor's wife, and so she told me, she's like, you need to go to church with me. Okay. Apparently that's what we're supposed to do. I thought all the kids were going to go to church with her. I did not know, because this girl, Patty, went to church with her, so I'm like, oh, we all go to church with Mrs. Ball. Okay. I'll go to church with her. But then it's so that's where I needed to be for the teacher to like me. And so then it became this thing is that, okay, teachers like you better if you do the things that they tell you to do. And so there became these little things that built into me is that one time, kids being kids, is that she, one of the teachers was the track sponsor. And I was running track, because I was a good runner by then. I'd ran from all kinds of people. And she's doing her math lesson. And as adults will do, which I learned to be careful about that as an adult, is to say things. She said, she's like, you all should come work for me in the concession stand because the high schoolers don't do math as great as you do. And so I was like, I go home, I'm like, Mom, we're supposed to go work the concession stands at the track meet because she said she needs us because that we do math better than her high schoolers. Mom was like, Donna, that isn't what she meant. I'm like, no, I promise you. And I was convinced. I'm like, so she took me to the school, and she said she's supposed to be here. And I'm just sitting there, and the teacher was like, that isn't what I meant. And she felt so bad. And then I was embarrassed. So then I never told anybody those kinds of things again because I was like, I was great at something, but never tell people you're good at it because then it makes you look like a fool. I don't know why that makes me cry, but it makes me sad for when you feel afraid to even speak your value. It says that your value is non-existent. And there are people in the room that feel their value is non-existent. I'm over that now, but it makes me sad for that girl then. So, people are scary. Water will kill you. Don't tell anybody you're good at anything, but be good at everything so that you can be accepted. Clubs are where you're supposed to be. and you start building all the stuff up, is like, who am I? And where am I supposed to be? So church was the one place where you got lots of credit for being there all the time. And you would get called out. Let me get my Kleenex. And because the one place that you get called out in some of the churches, and this church is not like that, not all churches are, so my disclaimer is that this is not an everybody always kind of thing, but this is a do with that what you will. And so, but they will call you out at what you're doing so that others will do it and feel, because that makes them feel less significant if they're not doing it. Like, look at Donna. Donna goes to camp 7 times in the summer because she just wants to serve. Donna thinks there's cute boys there, and she gets to go and swim all the time, and she doesn't have to take care of her siblings. But, you know, let's look at the stuff that, like, gets you credit. And Donna always is at church. Every service, she's there. Because when Donna's at church every service, not only am I getting, you know, I'm there doing everything I'm supposed to do, but now I'm getting, like, recognized for it. But I don't call it out because that would be arrogance. And then Donna sings, but you don't tell everybody that you sing because then that would be arrogance. So then you have to be asked. So then even when you feel called to say that you're supposed to do something, you don't say it because when you do, you get shut down because it's like, oh, well, that's not for you. And so building through that, you know, it became this thing is that you learn to be an obeyer of the rules. You learn to not really say what you're supposed to do. And you say, the way we get around that is to say, well, I think maybe possibly, I don't know, but God might want me to. What do you think? And then when someone else validates that and they say, yes, then you're like, okay, then you're called to it. But if they say, I really don't think that's you, or we'll pray about that. That was always a fun one. Then you're like, oh, okay, that's not me. And you walk away and you're like, and you know that that's who you're supposed to be, but you don't say it anymore. And then you kind of like hide that away. It's like, I'm not fit for this kind of thing, and I'm not fit for this kind of thing, and I'm not fit for this kind of thing. So you find your place. And so I used to hear is that I just at least want to be useful. I just want to be useful in the kingdom. Useful's great, but a toothbrush is useful, and please use them. But that is not the kind of usefulness, is that, you know, when you're in a church body and it's like, well, we really don't want you to have any kind of leadership or any kind of real input, but could you clean the church? And then you do. And I think cleaning the church is fantastic. I did it for my past church for like 27 years, clean the church all the time, because that's what I was suited to do. And you can work in the nursery. That would be great if you could take care of the babies, which taking care of the babies is very important. Why the Lord gave me a word to speak. Can you give it to me and let me see? And it's like, I don't think that's really going to fit our plan. You're like, okay, so, and those kinds of things you build up is that my usefulness is more important than my calling. And if our usefulness is more important than our calling to one person, then that starts saying to you that I'm probably not hearing the Lord right. I'm probably not, you know. And then there is the fears that we have. So I have a couple other fears that the Lord kept speaking to me that was like, okay, so what are the other ones that you had? Why are we afraid? Why are we afraid? And it's failure. We're afraid to fail because if we fail, that means that we're less than. And if we're less than, or we failed at that, that means that someone else could do it better. Now, this is how my mind works, okay? Rejection. Rejection means that your value is not important to me. So if my value is not important to you, then that rejection means that I don't belong. And these are things that have been said to me as well by from other people, is that rejection is actually the thing that lets you know is that your value is diminished in the eyes of not just you, but them. And if your value to you, if you're strong, you're like, you know what, I got rejected by boys a few times, but whenever the one that you really want to like you rejects you, then your value is minimized. You're like, oh, I guess I'm not the person I thought I was. Pain. We're afraid of pain. We're afraid to try something or do something because pain. And pain isn't just physical, although I don't want to jump off of a rock into the lake like some of my friends do, because I'm afraid of the water and the pain and maybe not coming back up, and a stick underneath, and probably the snake that's in the water. So there's a lot of things there. Now, if it weren't for all those things, I'd probably jump because I love jumping. I jumped out of a plane, and I loved it, and I'll do it again and again and again if I could. It does cost a little bit of money, but for my son's birthday last year, he wanted to jump, 21st birthday. So one of my daughters, and my son and I, we went out to Miller, and all the way, people kept saying, yeah, and they kept saying, other people say, you're going to jump out of a plane? Oh, well, that's stupid. I'm like, well, sounds fun to me. And then they'd be like, who jumps out of a perfectly good plane? I heard that from somebody that's laughing right now. And I said, well, apparently I do, because I'm going to. And then they kept saying, oh, you're going to get really nervous. And I thought, okay. So I'm ready. I'm ready to be nervous. And so leading up to it, never nervous. I'm like, I'll probably get nervous on the way down then because everyone keeps saying I'll get nervous. Nope. And then I'm like, okay, I'll get nervous whenever I go to get on the plane. We do the training and everything, and my kids get up there. I'm like, oh man, this is so fun. I'm so excited. And then I'm like, okay, but when you get in the plane, you're going to get nervous. I'm like, okay. So I get in the plane, and the guy keeps like jabbing at you because he's used to people who's like, are you nervous? I'm like, no, let's go. I'm like, is it time to jump? Like, no, not yet. We have to get up higher. I'm like, okay. And so we get up there, and I kept thinking, I'm going to get nervous. I'm going to get nervous. And the Lord said, why? I've got you. And I have a parachute, and people are like, well, what if the parachute fails? Then I die doing something I was really excited to do, And I jumped, and my face hurt so much by the time I landed, not because of the wind, but because I was smiling so big, I couldn't stop. And he was like, well, what do you want to do? I'm like, make it fun. And he starts spinning us and flipping us, and I was just like, do it again. Because the thing was, I wasn't afraid. Because I wasn't afraid, it was so fun. It was so much fun. Is that, he let me go, that was the most fun jump I've done in a long time. Because I was excited, and so he was making it even more fun. And, he was like, even I got dizzy. And I'm like, yeah, it was a little bit, but, you get dizzy. But I'm 49. I jumped out of a plane, and I wasn't yet 49 because I'm still 48. But the thing of it was, I wasn't afraid to fall because I knew I had something to catch me, and I knew that it was going to be fine. I didn't have any fear over that, and that kind of fun made me think, what else would I do if I didn't have that kind of fear? Would I jump from the rock into the water? We'll see. I haven't got there yet, but that was the question. I'm like, what are the things we would do? And so then the Lord started asking me a couple of other questions. What are other things we're afraid of? Loss. We're afraid of loss. And it's not just loss of people. It's loss that makes us feel like we won't survive. My friend lost her son and husband about 10 years ago now. About 6 months before my dad passed away. And the loss I felt for this little boy and for my friend, the burden of the pain was so much, I thought, I don't know that we can make it. And her loss made me hurt even more because our job is to bear someone else's burden. And so then I got really afraid of losing my kids. Really afraid. And I thought, how is she going to live? How is she going to make it through this? Because how do I make it through this? And he wasn't even mine. And she did. She made it through. And then you realize is that the days you think you won't make it through, you do. And so you get to watch and you get to see the Lord's faithfulness to carry us through the loss. Because loss is not about never hurting, but it's about believing that you will be able to live and overcome the loss. And that loss makes what you have so much sweeter. And it doesn't mean that grief ever ends, and it doesn't mean that you won't ever lose, but I started holding on to my kids so tight is that it caused so much conflict because I was afraid to lose them that I was losing them. And we get like that. And so in that is that I might lose for a moment what I can see, but we never lose a person. We just lose their presence. Because grief is about us missing them. It's about their presence with us. And so the grief that came is that can I trust the Lord enough to know is that what began in eternity and we can visibly see right now will continue in eternity, and that none of that ever negates the other, is that we are not the only person that validates existence. Our existence is validated by God, and we just get to witness it. We are not the validation. We're just the witnesses. And the Lord started speaking to me about that, is that I work in property management, and we have guarantor forms that we have to have some people do, and we have to have someone, a notary, validate their signature. And the signature is valid. It's their signature, but we have to have someone else validate that it's real. That notary seal doesn't make the signature real. It just tells us that it's real. We're the ones that we're just simply certifying that we see this. We are just simply witnessing it because there's another spot that says it's a witness. That person doesn't make that seal more important. It just says that I saw them do this and I saw them sign this. And when we start looking at that, is that I am just a witness of what has been created in my kids. I'm not their validation. I'm not even the one that, even though I was an active part, I didn't make them exist. God did. Because God made them exist, and God has validated their existence. Even before I knew them, and even after I get to see them, their existence is still real. Yeah. It's still there. And the more that we see that, the less that we fear the loss. And so when my dad passed away, I didn't process through all this stuff because I was pretty numb, but in things in my history that I don't, again, I'm not going to say things that that would besmirch anyone's reputation, but the things that were there, I grieved less about him than I did about this person, because this person always loved me, and this person had brought hurt into my life. We'll just leave it there. I know that family listens, and I don't want to take anything away from him. But I was like, well, why don't I miss this loss from that loss? It's because this one carried with it a lot of pain. We're not afraid to let go of the pain. We're just afraid to let go of the joy. And we should hold on to the joy. But what if we let go of the pain and God allows some of the joy to come back in? He allows to make room. And as I was processing through that, thinking about it, and I don't know if anyone else gets this. Last night in our 15 hours of driving back from Georgia, my friend Brandy asked, she's like, do you believe that God speaks to most people? And I was like, I believe God speaks to every person. And so we start talking about, well, what does God's voice sound like? How does he talk to us? How does he do this? And, some people say, I've never heard him talk to me. It's like, well, and so I had said something. She goes, well, I was waiting for you to expand on it. I'm like, well, I was processing. And so the Lord started reminding me of, and he put this in, is that there's this video out there of this little baby. She's probably 2. She's really sweet and pretty, and the parents, you can tell she's deeply loved. But she doesn't have a lot of expression on her face, and she doesn't react when her parents say something. And then they do a little switch in the back, and she has a cochlear implant. And it switches on, and she hears her mom's voice for the first time, and her face lights up with smiles. And then the mom starts crying, because it wasn't about, her mom had been telling her she'd loved her the whole time, but she couldn't hear it because her ears weren't tuned to it. And as soon as that switch was turned on, she heard it, and she started laughing and smiling, and they're all crying and everything. We often have our switches turned off. We haven't equipped our ears to hear, or we haven't helped someone else's ears to hear. And if all of you've heard is silence or darkness or pain or whatever, you can't hear through that to get to the truth that says you're loved, you're good enough, you're beautiful. And this mom is just sitting there, she's like, oh, you're so beautiful. And the baby's just smiling, all these things. And the thing of it is that this mom has been saying this the whole time, because a baby already knows. Here's the thing, a baby will smile based upon not what you say, but how you look at them. And so this mom had been smiling, so the baby knew how to smile, but the giggles happened when she could hear her. And she started giggling, and it's the most beautiful thing. When we start hearing that God loves us, and we believe it, and all of a sudden we can hear that voice, that mom's voice, that baby will always know that voice. My kids, I used to be able to walk into a room, and and I, again, with this mom's group, there's kids everywhere, and whenever my kids were growing up the same way, and I would walk in and I'd say, kids. I didn't say their names because I had 4, and I'd probably get them wrong half the time. So I'd walk in and I'd say, kids, and they would turn and look at me. There's moms, there's kids everywhere, but they knew my voice, and they responded to that. We have to learn to know God's voice. We have to hear it, and the way we hear it. And so for me, I hear it in pictures, and sometimes I will have a 17-hour conversation in 2 seconds with the Lord. And so he does this. And so that's where dealing with the loss is that the Lord started talking about is that the picture he gave me is that loss is like the Oklahoma clay. I don't know if you've ever been in Oklahoma. My dad was determined to plant and have a garden because there were 8 of us, and it was expensive feeding us, so he decided to grow a garden in Oklahoma in the clay. All right, Dad. Clay, when it is dry and it is hot in Oklahoma, it like cracks, and it looks like when you're a kid and you put Elmer's glue all over your hand and you let it dry, and then you start doing this and it starts cracking everywhere. You're like, oh, I have a disease. And so my dad was like, no, something will grow out of here. Like, okay. So we got to help with that. And he didn't bring in soil because that would cost. So he just kept tilling it and tilling it and tilling it. And he finally got to soil underneath. And he grew corn and green beans and tomatoes and beans and all kinds of stuff in that Oklahoma clay, because he was determined. Sometimes we have to be willing to keep tilling the soil and get past the clay, the hardness, the stuff that's crusty on the outside to get to the soil, to get to the real ground that's down there. And it's down there. It's hiding. It just may be really deep. But we have to break through some of that. We have to break loose all the things that make us not want to experience loss again. And that clay that kind of gets in there and it covers you up, and you're like, I'm just not going to love again like that. I'm just not going to trust again like that. I'm not going to do it because it hurts too much and it's too hard. But there's stuff growing down there. There is things to grow that are going to be planted and they're going to spring forth. And what if we're not afraid to love again? What if we're not afraid of loss? And instead, we get to experience the great love that comes from opening our hearts. For me, my bigger fears have always been embarrassment or being an embarrassment. And I used to get embarrassed really easy. When Rob and I were first dating, and we went shopping at a store, and we went somewhere and everything, and he said something. I was like, Eddie talks to this lady, and I'm not even going to give the situation because I'd probably, like, right now, I'd be like, oh. But I got so embarrassed that he talked to the sales lady, and I was like, why would you ever, like, tell her stuff? Because we were getting married, we're shopping. That's all I'm going to say. And I was just like, why would you tell her that? Why would you tell? And I was just like, and I was horrified that anyone would even think of us like that. And I was just so embarrassed. I was so embarrassed. My face was hurting. I was like, I think I'm going to throw up. I think we're going to throw up, but I can't tell. I mean, we're getting, and I'm just walking around. I'm like dizzy. My head, like I could hear the embarrassment. It was like a buzzing sound. I knew that I was blushing because it felt like my face was like going to explode. But I would get that. I was like, why? I didn't want anyone to think anything kind of negative about me. Because there was this thing that was said that it's like, if someone thought of that way about me, it's like, it was horrifying. But then even more so is that if I was embarrassment to somebody else. And so I did get over that by the time my kids were teenagers, because it's kind of fun being an embarrassment to your kids. But only when you choose to, because I didn't want to be an embarrassment. So I started thinking back, it's like, my dad showed up to one of my basketball games, and I probably shared this before, but my dad is half Indian. So when we lived in Oklahoma, he grew out his beard to about down here. Davies is almost there. And then his hair was down to here. So he showed up to one of my basketball games with ponytails in both his beard and his hair, all the way down, holding him down. And I was just like, oh, Dad. And I'm thinking, oh, please don't, I don't want anyone to know that's my dad. You know, and I was so embarrassed. And we're playing basketball that I couldn't play. Because I could hear my embarrassment so loud. Again, it was a physical manifestation. I could hear it. I couldn't hear my coach. I couldn't hear the kid. I couldn't hear anything. All I could hear was that I could hear my dad's beard. That's all I could hear. And later the Lord's like, why are you so afraid of other people representing you in a way? You know, because to me it was like, because this is about me. It really was about me. It had nothing to do, he did nothing wrong, but it was about me. It's that, what if people think less of you? What if you are less than? Because you're working really hard to be more than more. And you're working really hard. So what is it about? And I was so horrified that someone would think badly about me. Because I'd already had, you know, that was right before the news article too. So that made it great. And then status. We're afraid that we'll lose our status, or we're afraid to be elevated to status and people think that you think you're better than them. Because I don't want to be better than anybody. When my husband's in the car business, and so we've had a lot of vehicles over the years. Ray knows what that's like. And so you get a new vehicle, and for several times, and there are 3 colors of cars I don't like to get. I don't want a black one. I have a black Jeep. I don't like blue. I've had 3 blue vans. I don't like gray, you know, just because boring in my hair. But we had 3 blue vans along the way, but I never told any of my family that they were new vans because I didn't want them to think that we were better or anything and like be, oh, you're trying to show off your new van. So I was for a while. I was like, we'd get a van and it would always be blue, and I was like, it's because that way I don't have to tell them I have a new vehicle, because it'd be like, oh, must be nice to have a new vehicle, like. And so it'd be like, it's you know, and they'd be like, is this a new van? No, I wouldn't say no. And they're like, oh, is this your van? I'm like, yeah, I've always had a blue van. Not lying. And so going through there. So then we have other things that we're afraid to be too much. And that was always my thing too, is that I'm too loud. I make too many weird faces. I do, trust me. My kids have told me. I've been told by others. I tell really, really awesome puns that some people don't enjoy as much as I do. And I can be a little too pushy, a little too judgmental, a little too excited, a little too everything. And so you dial it back in certain areas, because it's like, if you don't want to be too much and people reject you, or you're not enough. So you don't want to be not enough. So you're trying to figure out, it's like, I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not pretty enough, you know. So then we have these fears of not being enough, and you're trying to figure out, it's like, okay, so how can you balance being too much and not enough, and how do you figure out how to be in the middle of the line? How do you be nondescript and be kind of like average, but still be good at what you do, because you don't want people to think less of you, but then you don't want to try too hard, because then you're just trying too hard and you're being the teacher's pet. But if you do, and it becomes this constant spiral of like, you're just messed up. You're just going to be not enough and too much all at the same time. And so how do you figure that out? How do you do that? And where do we get past that? So as we get through these things and we start looking at this, what we look at is we have verse, what is it? Hebrews 10, 1 through 4. The old system of living under the law presented us with only a faint shadow, a crude outline of the reality of the wonderful blessings to come. Even with its steady stream of sacrifices offered year after year, there was still nothing that could make our hearts perfect before God. For if animal sacrifices could once and for all eliminate sin, then they would have ceased to be offered, and worshipers would have clean consciences. Instead, once was not enough, and so by the repetitive sacrifices, again and again and again and again, not measuring up, the worshipers were continually reminded of their sins, with their hearts still impure. For what power does the blood of bulls and goats have to remove sin's guilt? And then Hebrews 10:10. By God's will, we have been purified and made holy once and for all through the sacrifice of the body of Jesus, the Messiah. He didn't have to come to die for us. He didn't have to shed blood. But they were looking for a way to figure out, how can I just be enough? How can I not be too much? How can I be free from fear? Because everything we do, every decision we make is one step away from either success or failure, based upon what we choose. Every decision we make, every thought we have is one step away from sin or righteousness, everything. And so we're continually in this thing. And then go over to 1 John 4, and then 7 through 12. Little children, you can be certain that you belong to God and have conquered them, for the one who is living in you is far greater than the one who's in the world. Those who are loved by God, let his love continually pour from you to one another. And I pause there. Who's loved by God? All of us. To you, who's loved by God. Because God is love. Everyone who loves is fathered by God. Everyone who loves, even if they don't believe that God loves them. Because if you can love, that is a part of the Father. Your ability to love is only because the Father loves and because we are created in his image. Everyone who loves is fathered by God. Everyone who loves is fathered by God and experiences an intimate knowledge of him. The one who doesn't love has yet to know God, for God is love. It doesn't say that they never will. The light of God's love shined within us when he sent his matchless Son into the world so that we might live through him. And this is love. He loved us long before we loved him. It was his love, not ours. He proved it by sending his Son to be pleasing sacrifice to the offering to take away their sins. Okay, he sent them not because he had to, but because they were looking for a sacrifice. And so would this please you? The bull didn't please you. The goat didn't please you. The lamb, whatever you have sacrificed, that didn't please you. What can please you? And God is always trying to find ways. It's like, I just love you. What will please you so you will trust that I love you? Delightfully loved ones. If he loved us with such tremendous love, then loving one another should be our way of life. No one has ever gazed upon the fullness of God's splendor, but if we love one another, God makes his permanent home in us, and we make our permanent home in him. His love brought to its full expression is in us. What would we do if we're not afraid? Who would we be if we're not afraid? What would we try? How would we worship if we weren't afraid that God didn't love us? How would we worship if we weren't afraid that we had fallen and we walked in and God was looking at us wrong? How would we worship if we didn't feel like we had to worship for God to love us and for him to send his love towards us? And we sing the songs like Fall Down on Me and Spirit Come Now and Break Down These Walls. And those are less about God breaking down the walls. And all these songs I kept hearing all weekend long is about us breaking through the walls to see God's love. It's like Spirit Come Now. It's like, it's not him waiting. He's not waiting outside of here. He's waiting for us to just like, you can come. You can be a part of this. He's already here. Break through my walls and allow that. Is that we are fenced in. And like with dogs, we don't keep a fence. We don't put a fence normally to keep people out of our yard as much as we do to keep the dogs in the yard. And what if we open the gate and we just allow that? Who would we do good things for? Who would we allow in our lives? How would we love them in a way that says is that I'm not afraid of rejection if I love this person that is living a lifestyle that the Christians will not accept. If I embrace their love or I embrace them, does that say less about God or me? Or does it say more about God and me? Am I worried about the mentality that says is that what the American Christians have put in place, that the Bible says, versus the other? And there's this meme that goes through, and I was listening to it, and it says, tell me some things that you think are in the Bible that are not. And two of them that stood out, and I've been watching these heated battles all around me, and just things that I'm learning a lot of things, and one of them was like, white people. They're not in the Bible. But we assume that all the American stuff, that's in the Bible. It says there is no black or white, Jew or Gentile. It's that it doesn't say for this or this. It says those who love God and know God and those who don't. It's really about Jewish and non-Jewish. It has nothing to do with color. Nothing. And I have a lot of people that I love that are many colors, a rainbow of colors, and I love all from Latina African American, any of that, because it has nothing to do with that. It's that my people are my people, regardless. And then another one, it says homosexuality. It's like it didn't say that. And you go through Leviticus and it says this. It says, well, actually, that has to do with like a man not laying down with a child, because that's pedophilia. But homosexuality is not even in there, in those things. And I'm not going to go a whole thing into that, because Terry's going to talk about that some. But what if we decided to just love people and take away those things that said that I can't love you, or I can't embrace you, or I can't endorse you because of this and this and this? And what if we stop saying that and go, okay, the sin that is in there says that I'm less than. The sin that in there says that Jesus doesn't love me, that God doesn't love me. And we think wrongly about God. Or I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not strong enough, I'm not brave enough, I'm not this enough. And not only that, is that I'm unlovable. And we instead walk out not afraid. What if we're not afraid?